අද්විතීය 200 Mbps ස්පීඩ් එකකින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ වේගවත්ම සහ පුළුල්තම හෝම් බ්‍රෝඩ්බෑන්ඩ් සම්බන්ධතාවය වන SLT මොබිටෙල් දේශීය ෆයිබර් බලවේගය ඔබත් අදම අත්විඳින්න.
හරිම සුදුයි.
Tonight on First at 9, this Thursday the 6th of April 2023. On hold, government decides to postpone the tabling of new anti-terrorism bill to May. Contrasting views. This government doesn't have the mandate of the people, says NPP MP Harini Amarasuriya.
Nobody voted for Ranil Wickremesinghe to be president or for Dinesh Gunawardena to be prime minister.
However, State Minister of Tourism Derana English says not everyone is going to be happy with the government's decisions.
If we are, as a government, going to ask every individual in a country for their consent of every little thing, then we don't need a government.
Boost. Ceylon Electricity Board acquires the Sojit's Kalanthissa power plant.
Alliance Finance මෙතුරු රන්නයි සේවාවෙන් රන් පවුම්කට රුපියල් 1,70,000ක ඉහළ අධිකාරම.
ඔබේ විශ්වාසය දෙනු සෙන්සුරයින් දැන් ළඟමැති ෆාමසියෙන් ලබාගත හැක.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9 with Andrew Bernard. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. In your top story for tonight, the Minister of Trade and Justice Vijayadasa Rajapaksa today announced that the tabling of the new anti-terrorism legislation, which would replace Sri Lanka's current counter-terrorism law, would be delayed further. Meanwhile, issuing a statement today, the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka urged the government to reconsider the definition of terrorism mentioned in the anti-terrorism bill and recommended specific amendments to clarify the narrowed down the acts falling within its definition. The Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka today released a statement highlighting that the definition of terrorism has long been a contentious issue, adding that the broad scope of the definition complicates the matter. The statement read that the definition contemplated in the new anti-terrorism bill makes it difficult to distinguish between legitimate acts of dissent and actual acts of terrorism. The Commission further mentioned that the bill not only violates the right to protest peacefully, but also the right to free speech, which is an unchallengeable right set out throughout the Constitution. It was also pointed out that under Section 32F of the bill, obstructing essential services or supplies also falls under an act of terrorism, and thus even a person who engages in peaceful protests or rallies can be defined as a person engaged in terrorism. It went on to note that this definition has an unsettling effect on freedom of speech and the freedom of movement, which shall result in a climate of fear which is not conducive to a healthy democracy. In this backdrop, expressing their distress against the proposed new anti-terrorism bill, a group of civil activists today staged a silent protest in front of the Embassy of Switzerland in Colombo. The group also took measures to hand over a letter pertaining to the matter to the Swiss ambassador. Further, the group then engaged in silent protests and handed over relevant letters to the representatives of the Australian and British High Commission, as well as the Chinese and Russian embassies in Sri Lanka. With that being the case, Minister of Justice Vijayadasa Rajapaksa today announced that it has been decided to postpone the tabling of the new anti-terrorism bill in Parliament, considering the requests made by members of the opposition, attorneys and civil society activists. Accordingly, he stated that the bill will likely be presented to the Parliament at the end of April or in the beginning of May.
බොහෝ නීතිඥවරුන් විපක්ෂයේ කණ්ඩායම් සහ සමාජික ක්‍රියාකාරීන්ගෙන් ඉල්ලීමක් ආවා. මෙය සිංහල අවුරුදු ඒ වගේම අධිකරණයේ නිවාඩු කාල සීමාව තුල ඉදිරිපත් කරන්නේ නැතුව ඒගොල්ලන්ට ප්‍රමාණවත් කාලයක් ලබා ගන්න අධ්‍යයනය කරන්න අවශ්‍ය නම් පෙත්සම් ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න. ඒ අනුව මම තීරණය කරා ඊට අවස්ථාවක් ලබා දීලා අප්‍රේල් මාසයේ අග සතියේ හෝ මැයි මාසයේ මුල සතියේ ඒ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ඉදිරිපත් කරන්න. ඊට අමතරව විපක්ෂයෙන් ඉල්ලීමක් කරා පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ පළවන වර කියවීමට ප්‍රථම ඔවුන්ට මේ පිළිබඳව සාකච්ඡා කරන්න ඕන කියලා. ඒක නිසා අප්‍රේල් 25 වෙනිදා ආංශික කාරක සභාවේදී මේ සාකච්ඡා කරන්නටත් මම අවස්ථාව ලබා දීලා තියෙනවා. මේ පනත මගින් වෘත්තීය සමිති ක්‍රියාකාරකම් මාධ්‍ය ක්‍රියාකාරකම් වළක්වන්න නැත්තම් මේ පනතට ඇතුල් කරලා ඒගොල්ලන්ට දඬුවම් දෙන්න කටයුතු කරයි කියන බිය. හැබැයි පනතේ දෙවන වගන්ති අපි පැහැදිලිව සඳහන් කරනවා මේ පනත අදාළ වන්නේ කාටද කියලා. එතකොට පනතේ තුන්වෙනි වගන්තියෙන් අපි කියනවා ත්‍රස්තවාදී ක්‍රියාකාරකම් කියන්නේ මොනවද කියලා. එතකොට ඒ අනුව සමාජ ක්‍රියාකාරීන්ට සහ වෘත්තීය සමිතීන්ට තමන්ගේ කටයුතු සිදු කිරීම සඳහා මේ පනතෙන් බාධාවක් නැහැ. මේ සමහරු කිව්වට මේක රාජ්‍යාත්‍යන්තර මූල්‍ය අරමුදලේ අවශ්‍යතාවයන්ට අනුව අපි කටයුතු කරන එකුවට 2015 තමයි මේ 52ම අපි ගෙටුම්පත් කරන්න ආරම්භ කරේ. ඒ වෙලාව මට ඝන දෙවි නුවණ පාඩ වෙලා තිබුණේ නැහැ. 2022 අපි IMF එකට යනවායි කියලා.
The representatives from the World Bank praised what they termed as remarkable progress made on Sri Lanka's development policy operational program in advancing its development objectives. The remarks were made by the representatives during the final discussion in a series held with the World Bank representatives on Sri Lanka's development policy operational program this morning, chaired by Senior Advisor to the President on National Security and Chief of Presidential Staff Sagala Ratnayaka. During the meeting, the attendees discussed the next steps to complete Sri Lanka's development policy operational pre-actions such as the establishment of Parliamentary Budget Office, restructuring of the state-owned enterprises, welfare benefit payment systems, social registry and their respective timelines. Senior Advisor to the President Sagala Ratnayaka commended the World Bank for its contribution to Sri Lanka's development policy operations and expressed his hope for everyone's support in making the program a success. Now, MP of the National People's Power, Dr. Harani Amarasuriya, says that the current government was elected on a different mandate compared to the one prevalent today, emphasizing that the current government doesn't have the consent of the people to proceed with the reforms and decisions being implemented now. She made these remarks while speaking to Indivari Amwatta at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24 during a panel discussion today. Joining the panel discussion, State Minister of Tourism Derana English, however, denied Dr. Amarasuriya's remarks, stating that the government cannot seek the opinion of all 22 million people in the country, as it would not provide any significant progress in making decisions.
I'd also like to find out how you would address the current issue of protests and what your stance is, especially when the economy is trying to pick up from where it is.
The NPP would have been elected to power on a platform which people vote on and agree on. That's the only way we would be in power. What is happening right now is that the protests are also happening because these measures that are being implemented without people's consent. The measures that are being taken now are being imposed on people with no consultation, no ability for people to express themselves. People have been asking for system change in the last 1.5 to 2 years, and they've been denied an election, which is a democratic mode of expressing their will, and they're not allowed to protest either.
Would you agree that there is no public consent to the government's policy now?
Won't agree on that, because end of the day, if we are as a government going to ask every individual in a country, which is 22 million, for their consent of every little thing, then we don't need a government. That is why the parliamentary system is made, is to take decisions that is right for the country. So if we are going to talk to each and every individual who walks on the street with a board in their hand, then this country isn't going to go anywhere. You see, people are always going to protest. There's somebody unhappy all the time. So if you have to make everyone happy, then you're not going to be able to carry on. So we have to make the right decisions for the country and for the 22 million in the country, not for 1 million, not for 500,000 who would get onto the streets. You can protest, you obviously have the right. It's the right of the people to protest, to go against whatever they don't like. They can, that is freedom. But that doesn't mean you have to get onto the street for everything that you're not happy. You see, this is exactly what's taking place in Sri Lanka. It's become a joke, it's become a trend.
I really can't agree with that, because I think that within a democracy, we practice representative democracy. When we say we are representative of the people, then we are elected on a particular mandate. That is why there are things in many constitutions where people have the right to recall their representatives, or people have referendums, especially when there are serious reforms being imposed, that people can participate in that decision making. That is what democracy is. Elections are a fundamental part of that process also. Now currently in Sri Lanka, we don't have local government level representatives. We don't have provincial council representatives. There has been a aragale in this country demanding that all 225 of us should change, calling for election.
The 225
were elected on a different mandate, were elected with Gotabaya Rajapaksa as president, as Mahinda Rajapaksa as prime minister. Nobody voted for Ranil Wickremesinghe to be president or for Dinesh Gunawardena to be prime minister.
All this happened based on the constitution within a parliamentary system. Would you not agree to that?
It happened within the constitution, but the constitution doesn't give them the right to also postpone elections. If you are talking about the respect to the constitution and the law, the constitution says that the local government election should have happened on the 9th of March. So we can't cherry pick which aspects of the constitution we want to respect and which we don't. The constitution also says freedom of assembly and the right to protest, the right to express yourself. So we can't say that under these conditions we will respect this aspect of the constitution, under these conditions we don't. Those are not decisions that can be made by the president or the prime minister or any one of us. If we say that the constitution is what is holy and which should be represented, you can't cherry pick which clauses of the constitution you want to respect when it's convenient or not convenient.
Is the government waiting for the right time to have local government elections?
When it comes to the constitution also does not give the people of this country or anyone for their houses to be burnt down, to be murdered on the street by the public, representatives of the people, because end of the day it is the people who have elected the 225. We would have elected 8,711 into office. The people of this country has to fork out to pay this 8,711, and that, if you look at it, is 2.61 billion rupees per annum in a situation like this. And there was no money in the country. When the country is in a bankrupt situation, we can't pay our loans, we can't give the people of the country what they need. Are we going to employ another 8,711 into this?
Now, the Centre for Environmental Justice states that there is a risk of losing the opportunity to claim nearly $6.4 billion in compensation for the environmental damage caused by the fire aboard the Express Pearl vessel last year. They allege that such a situation arose as a result of the failure of relevant authorities to take proper action regarding the matter. The Express Pearl ship was destroyed in an explosion in the shallow sea of Negombo in May 2021, causing massive environmental damage to the surrounding coastline and the ecosystem. The Centre for Environmental Justice alleges that the relevant authorities have not acted properly to claim the relevant compensation for the environmental damage. Now, the Ceylon Electricity Board successfully acquired the 163 megawatt combined cycle power plant, which was operated by the Sojitz Kalnitesa Limited. The CB made this acquisition in order to raise the power generation capacity of the country.
The CEB acquired the power plant on the 28th of March 2023 after the process was initiated in the latter part of 2022 in accordance with the terms and conditions of the power purchase agreement. The acquisition process was facilitated with the aim of increasing the capacity of electricity generated in light of the future power requirements of the country. Thus, the CEB-owned 163 megawatt facility will be compatible with LNG following some minor modifications and thereby enabling the reduction of the current cost of generation when the conversion takes place. Under the policy framework of the Government of Sri Lanka, the CEB signed the PPA with Sojitz Kalnitesa Private Limited in June 2000 as an independent power producer on a BOOT basis. The contract period was for 20 years and the power plant is located in the Colombo Kalnitesa Power Plant Complex. A statement by the CEB stated that the negotiations carried out by the state company were hard, especially due to economic constraints, obstacles, challenges, and many issues, including legal aspects. But the CEB has managed to overcome those difficulties and finally gained ownership of the 163 megawatt power plant. They went on to say that the CEB appreciates all those government entities who have helped immensely to complete the acquiring process successfully. They added that CEB appreciates Sojitz Kalanitisa Limited for the operation of the power plant for over 19 years and for the cordial cooperation extended during the negotiation and transfer process of the facility.
Now, the State Minister of Defence, Pramita Bandara Tennakoon, has asserted that the current government is not ready to act according to the whims and fancies of trade unions. State Minister Tennakoon further emphasised that although the government does not intend to follow a repressive policy at a time when the country is recovering from the economic crisis, he emphasised that no one will be allowed to disrupt this system.
අපි විශාල ආර්ථික අර්බුදයකින් එළියට ඇවිල්ලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒ සඳහා විශේෂ ප්‍රයත්නයක් ජනාධිපතිතුමා ප්‍රමුඛ රජයේ දැරුවා. දැන් ඒකේ සහන ජනතාවට ලැබෙන කාලයක වකවානුවක ඉන්නේ. විශේෂයෙන් මට මේ ඉල්ලීමක් කරන්න තියෙනවා. අපි සියලු දෙනාම එකතු වෙන්න ඕනේ. අපි අතර තියෙන වාද ભેද ප්‍රශ්න ගැටලු අමතක කරන්න ඕනේ. රට වෙනුවෙන් සියලු දෙනාම එකතු වෙලා වැඩ කරන්න ඕනේ. ආරක්ෂක රාජ්‍ය අමාත්‍යවරයා විදියට අපේ ඉල්ලීම අපේ වොමනාව ඒක සියලු දෙනාටම එකට ජීවත් වෙන්න පුළුවන් රටක් හදන එක තමයි අපේ වගකීම යුතුයකම. ඒ වගේම අතිගරු ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ නායකත්වයේ යටතේ අපි ආර්ථිකය ස්ථාවරභාවයට පත් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම අපරාධ රැල්ල මඩ පවත්වලා තියෙනවා. අපි ඉදිරියටත් එවැනි තත්වයක් ඇති නොවෙන්න වග බලා ගන්නවා.
පක්ෂ චෝදනාවක් තියෙනවා මර්ධනකාරී ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් අරන් ගිහලා තියෙනවා.
නෑ මර්ධනකාරී ප්‍රතිපත්තියක් ගෙනීම රජයේ ප්‍රතිපත්තිය නෙවෙයි. හැබැයි ජන ජීවිතය අඩාල කරන්න කාටවත් ඉඩ දෙන්න පුළුවන් කමක් නැහැ. සාධාරණ උද්ඝෝෂණ වලට වැඩ වර්ජන වලට අපේ කිසිම පීඩාවක් කරදරයක් බාධාවක් නැහැ. ඒවට අපි ඉඩ දෙනවා. නමුත් ජනතාව පීඩාවට පත් කරන කිසිම දෙයක් කරන්න අපිට දෙන්න ඉඩ තියන්න පුළුවන් කමක් නැහැ. අපි එක එක්කෙනා කීපු විදිහට වැඩ කරා මෙච්චර දවසක්. වෘත්තීය සමිති වලට ඕනි විදිහට වැඩ කරා. අපි විවිධ පාර්ශ්ව වලට ඕනි විදිහට වැඩ කරා. අවසානයේ වගකීම තියෙන්නේ අපේ. ඒක නිසා අපි එක එක්කෙනාට ඕනි විදිහට වැඩ කරන රජයක් නෙවෙයි. තවදුරටත් තියෙන්නේ මේක අලුත් රටක්, අලුත් නායකයෙක්, අලුත් ජනාධිපතිවරයෙක්, අලුත් රජයක්. මේ රජයේ යටතේ අපි පැහැදිලි වැඩපිළිවෙලක් දර්ශනයක් ඇතුව වැඩ කරන්නේ. අපි වගකීමෙන් වැඩ කරන්නේ. මේ වෙලාව අපි සියලු දෙනාගෙන්ම ඉල්ලන්නේ අපේ රටේ ප්‍රගමණයට දියුණුවට තිබුණු ප්‍රධාන බාධාව තමයි රටේ ජනතාව අතර තිබුණු අසමගිය අවිශ්වාසය. අපි
Now stay with us to find out the latest developments in the oil and international markets. All this and much more coming up right after this short commercial break.
ගොඩමඩ පෙරලි කරන බලපුළුවන් කාරයා මහින්ද්‍රා යුවෝ ඩීමෝ වෙතින්. වැඩම ගොඩයි ගොඩම තමයි ස්වරාජ් ට්‍රැක්ටර් ඩීමෝ වෙතින්.
පාරිභෝගිකයන් වෙත අසම සම ප්‍රතිලාභ හිමිකරදීම අපට අභිමානයක්. රුපියල් බිලියන 9.8ක බෝනස් නිකුතුවක්. මාසිකව වන්දිගෙවීම රුපියල් බිලියන 1.8ක්. මානුෂීය හේතුන් සැලකිල්ලට ගනිමින් වන්දි ලබාදීම. Sri Lanka Insurance.
Welcome back. The Sri Lankan stocks edged up today as holidays and the long weekend brought the index down, dampening investor sentiment. The all-share price index ended up at 82.93 points to end at 9,256.9. The S&P SL20 index, a more liquid index, closed up at 21.64 points, ending at 2,685.91. Meanwhile, the market saw an overall turnover of 811 million rupees. Valuable Finance, Sampath Bank and Sri Lanka Telecom were the top gainers. The market saw a net foreign inflow of 66 million rupees and the total off-share outflows recorded so far in 2023 are 2.8 billion rupees. Now let's take a look at how the Sri Lankan rupee traded against other major currencies during the day. Now, world stocks drifted today while the US Treasury yields hovered near multi-month lows following traders awaiting crucial US job data. Meanwhile, the Asia-Pacific markets largely fell today as Wall Street digested the largest ADP private payrolls report, which showed slowing job growth in March.
Global stocks drifted today and US Treasury yields hovered near multi-month lows as traders awaited crucial US jobs data that may add to mounting concerns about a global economic slowdown. Europe's Stock 600 share index added 0.3%, boosted by data showing German industrial output rose significantly more than the forecast in February. But recession fears weighed in on US stock futures and crude oil. US Nasdaq E-mini futures pointed to a 0.5% drop at the New York Open after the tech stock benchmark slumped 1% overnight. E-mini futures for the broader S&P 500 slipped 0.1%, following yesterday's 0.25% slide. Meanwhile, the Dow Jones Industrial Average futures dipped 40 points, while S&P 500 futures were 0.2% lower. Asia-Pacific markets largely fell today as Wall Street digested the latest ADP private payrolls report, which showed slowing job growth in March. South Korea's KOSPI led losses in the region as it closed 1.44% down at 2,459 points, while the Kosdaq dropped 0.78%. Japan's Nikkei slid 1.22% to end the day at 27,472 points, and the Topix lost 1.14% to close at 1,961 points. The Australian S&P ASX 200 slipped 0.36% to end at 7,219 points. In mainland China, the Shanghai Composite was down marginally and closed at 3,312 points, while the Shenzhen component was up marginally to end at 11,866 points. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was trading 0.2% higher, while the Hang Seng Tech Index rose 0.1%.
Now, oil markets were steady today, poised to make gains this week given the production cuts announced by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. Meanwhile, the OPEC Plus pledging surprise production cuts, Brent and US crude gained more than 6% this week.
Oil prices steadied today and remained on track for a third weekly gain as further production cuts targeted by OPEC Plus and a drop in US oil inventories overshadowed fears over global economic growth. Brent and US crude have both gained more than 6% this week after the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and allies including Russia on Sunday pledged surprise production cuts. Brent crude futures rose by 0.1% to settle at $85.11 by 11:33 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time. Meanwhile, West Texas Intermediate crude fell by 6 cents to end at $80.55. The US dollar index strengthened today, rebounding from a recent 2-month low. A stronger dollar makes crude becomes more expensive for holders of other currencies and tends to reflect greater risks of aversion among investors. Also, underpinning the market was this week's snapshot of US supply, which showed crude inventories fell by a more than expected 3.7 million barrels, while gasoline and distillate inventories also declined, hinting at rising demand.
And that's all the news we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow for the very latest news at the very same time. Have a pleasant evening and good night.